Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, March 19th, 2020, and today we're going to be discussing the 2020 Democratic presidential primary and its steps moving forward. As of today, Joe Biden not really announced, but decided that he's going to be transitioning his campaign into a general election campaign. There's been a major push to name Joe Biden the nominee amongst top party officials, not so much by the general public, but definitely by the establishment, mainly because of the COVID-19 whole debacle and how they're pushing primaries left and right, to June. And it's a really interesting discussion. Theoretically, Bernie Sanders does have a chance at the nomination, which is exactly what I will be covering in this video. That's the main purpose of this. I'm going to be discussing Bernie Sanders' slim but possible pathway to a contested convention or essentially victory, depending on how the superdelegates go. Essentially, if you take a look at the 2016 map, if you apply it to right now, it doesn't look like it's going to change much. Bernie Sanders definitely needed, as I made a video actually, I believe about a week ago, applying the 2016 results before Illinois, Arizona, and Florida. After that, there's no pathway for Bernie Sanders based off the 2016 map to actually reach even a contested convention, much less the magic number. And the sole reasoning for that is Bernie Sanders underperformed in Florida and Illinois. So he's not going to get the same amount of delegates that he had before. It was a narrow margin in Illinois in 2016. It was not a narrow margin this time around. Florida was not actually around the same. I believe Joe Biden may have gotten 10% more than Hillary Clinton or 9% more larger margin of victory. But Arizona I actually think might have been a little bit narrower, but it's only 67 delegates. So even if it was narrower, it wouldn't have mattered anyway. But let's go ahead and take a look at the remaining states. We have a lot of them. We have a lot of northeastern states. We have a lot of midwestern states. There's not that many southern states. So theoretically, Sanders should have the upper edge. Maybe not the upper edge, but definitely should be in a better place than he is right now. 538 officially gives Joe Biden a 99% chance at winning the nomination and Bernie Sanders a 0.3% chance. And unfortunately for Bernie Sanders, it looks like that's actually how it's going to go. Joe Biden looks like he's on track to win a number of states. And if you take a look at the remaining ones, based off of the trends that we've seen now, it doesn't look like Bernie Sanders is going to pull off another 2016 in a number of them. For example, Michigan. That was the state that halted the transition of Hillary Clinton's campaign from a Democratic primary into a general election campaign. She was riding her momentum, moving ahead into Michigan. It was almost a guarantee she was going to win. 538 rated it 99.9% chance of a Clinton victory. She ended up losing it. And it was one of the biggest upsets that we saw in the Democratic primary in 2016. And then this time around, same thing happened for Joe Biden, except he didn't lose it. So that's why there's no derailing of the Biden campaign, which is exactly why they're trying to transition into a general election campaign. Tulsi Gabbard, by the way, just recently announced that she's dropping out of the race, endorsing Vice President Biden. Announced that this morning in a long 4-minute video. If you want to go ahead and check that out, it's on her Twitter page. It's on her. She's sent an email to all her supporters. It's on her website, I'm sure. So you can go ahead and check that out. But let's go ahead and take a look at these remaining states. I know I talk a lot, so let's just see what's left. So let's start from west over to the east because there's way more delegates on the eastern side of the U.S. So we'll start with the western states. Alaska and Hawaii were actually states that Bernie Sanders won by pretty substantial margins back in 2016. So let's just assume he gets 70% margins, similar to the margins that he got back in 2016. To be honest, that doesn't change much. And even if this was the scenario, that barely narrows up the margin of almost 300 delegates for Vice President Biden. This winning map would not be a winning map, per se, of him winning the nomination outright. I'm probably going to find a way to throw that in there with the numbers, but it would just take a whole lot of victories and landslides that just aren't likely to happen. But his most probable pathway to the nomination is going through the superdelegate process and hoping that they choose the, Bernie Sanders over Joe Biden, which doesn't seem likely. So in order to actually make his mark, per se, he would need to win well in the state of Oregon. He got 56% of the vote here last time. So he's going to actually have to ramp that up. Probably, let's say there's an angered Bernie Sanders base. He's going to have to get 65% of the vote at least in order to even start building momentum back up. Let's say we have an upcoming primary in Wyoming. Let's say it's a 70% margin. Again, not that many delegates, though. If you're wondering why some states with a larger population than others have more delegates. It's based off of the number of congressional districts on top of the shared Democratic presidential vote in the previous election. So, for example, the state of Maryland, my home state, has 79 delegates, whereas Arizona, though it has one more electoral vote and a general larger population, only has 67 delegates. That's because my state voted for Hillary Clinton with an extremely large margin, I think around 30%. And obviously in Arizona, she did not win that state, so it didn't help when it came down to the primary process, which is exactly why a number of the southern states actually don't have as big of an impact. They just fill in a bigger portion of the map. But let's say New Mexico. Actually, let's veer away. Go up to Montana. That could be Sanders' country. Based off the 2016 results, it wasn't exactly the biggest margin. He won here with 52% of the vote. He would need somewhere around a 70% margin. Again, this is just all from Momentum State. In the state of South Dakota, Hillary Clinton did win here, but it was around a tie in terms of delegate counts. Bernie Sanders would have to run up the numbers. And when I say run up, I mean 70% to even start. He would need to start making gains. Nebraska, 70% for him would be what needs to occur in order for him. He hasn't even broken the 1,000 mark yet. Going over to Kansas, I think this is possible. Progressive candidates don't do exactly the worst in Kansas. He got 67% of the vote, 68% of the vote here. So maybe we could up it up to 75, 76%. Biden, of course, getting the rest. So that puts Bernie and Biden at about 1,000. It narrows the lead for Vice President Biden down to only 200 delegates. Realistically, we could possibly see Joe Biden not win the state of New Mexico despite him winning in Arizona, though they are neighboring states and also neighboring to Texas. Bernie Sanders did do well in Nevada and California, which are all part of the same Sun Belt there. So Bernie Sanders barely lost the state back in 2016. So we could probably say it is possible, not possible. If he was to win, he would have to win by that large of a margin. Unfortunately for Bernie Sanders, no matter how I draw this, I would say this is the most lenient margin for Bernie Sanders from the state of Louisiana. It's such a Democratic and establishment state. Hillary Clinton got 71% of the vote here, so I think that's being generous at most, but that just expands Biden's delegate lead. But if we take a look, Wisconsin could be an area that Bernie Sanders actually does well in. He won with 57% of the vote last time. Let's say that jumps up somehow to 65%. That would start putting Bernie Sanders even closer to coming back. But this is what the national news media means when they say that Joe Biden's lead is insurmountable. He's won all of these states, and it's barely put a dent in the delegate lead. Obviously, these aren't delegate-rich states, but there aren't going to be too many opportunities, especially with Biden's grip on the Northeast starting to solidify despite Sanders being from the Northeast. Also, if you're wondering why New Hampshire is not filled in, it's just because there was a tie in delegates between, Buttigieg, not Bloomberg. I don't know why I did that. Between Buttigieg and Sanders. So that should be an exact tie. Whatever. Let's see what's remaining. So Indiana, we can go ahead. 2016 was interesting. It wasn't, again, the largest margin of victory for, I almost called him Vice President Sanders, but we could say that it is possible. Maybe, again, 65% margins are things that Bernie Sanders is going to want to shoot for in order to get to a contested convention. Ohio, I'm not really seeing it much for Bernie Sanders. Hillary Clinton won here by a pretty substantial amount. We would have to say maybe a tie in terms of or a narrow Biden victory in order for that, because I generally do not see Bernie Sanders carrying that. Kentucky was why did my voice crack? Kentucky was extremely close, so it is possible that Sanders does win here. West Virginia, a lot of that vote was mainly because it was anti-Hillary Clinton. But I think that if he tries to appeal with the same message, we could see 75 to 25% margin. Georgia, again, realistically, that's just going to go to Joe Biden at most. We could say it narrows down 54, 45, but I can guarantee it's going to go way more than that for Joe Biden. But we can see he's starting to get within striking range of Vice President Biden. Maryland, honestly, that's Biden territory. We could say maybe narrow victory for Joe Biden, but it starts to just close up the gap just a tad bit. We're talking about trying to bring an ultimate comeback candidate. Joe Biden is the comeback candidate as of right now. Let's say somehow Bernie Sanders ends up winning in Pennsylvania. Let's say he gets, 56% of the vote. Biden gets 44. There's so many stretches I would have to pull in order to see, number one, even a contested convention. All of this map is not entirely likely. This is literally the only possible way that Bernie Sanders could win. He would need to have, and I'm giving realistic margins in a number of these states. He could theoretically do well in these states if he actually focuses his money on there. But again, they don't have delegate. I mean, the only thing that would be filling up would be the American, I guess, map in terms of land, but it wouldn't have a lot of delegates. New York, he did lose in 2016. In the off chance he wins it, he would have to win it by a large margin. But even then, he still does not overcome Joe Biden. This is what people are saying. It's going to be insanely hard to derail this candidate who already had a number of endorsements. And just the delegate math literally does not add up for Bernie Sanders. You're seeing me give Bernie Sanders 60-40 in states like New York, and then a more lenient margin in states like Ohio and Georgia and a number of other states, and giving him wins in Wisconsin and Indiana where he's already poised to lose. This is why a lot of people do not see a pathway for Bernie Sanders moving forward. New Jersey, on the off chance Sanders does end up winning it, again, it would have to be around that type of margin, and even then, he does not overcome Joe Biden. And with the remaining states, it's honestly not going to happen. Again, even with larger margins of victories than that, let's say 70% in the remaining states, all it does is bring to a contested convention, which is why I said, I said in the beginning of the video that I might be able to find a way for there to be a pathway for Sanders just outright, but I'm generally not seeing it. So much would have to work for this to happen. And even then, he still does not overcome Joe Biden despite winning in New York, in Pennsylvania, in New Jersey, in West Virginia, in Kentucky, in Indiana, in Wisconsin, winning in New Mexico, winning in a number of other states. It's not realistic for this, but assuming that this does end up being the actual numbers, once we hit this superdelegate number, they're probably going to end up voting for Joe Biden. We're thinking maybe at least 70% of the superdelegates for Joe Biden, but let's say somehow he flips it. That would be the only way for Sanders to actually win. Let's say somehow he gets slightly more superdelegates, still a stretch, narrow victory over Biden. I don't even think that's enough to win with the superdelegates added on to the regular pledge delegates. So I guess contested convention. And you also have to add, mind you, on top of all of this, you have to add the delegates from Buttigieg, Bloomberg, Klobuchar, and now Gabbard for Vice President Biden. These are all candidates that have endorsed Joe Biden. When it comes down to the nominating process and the convention, a lot of them will send their delegates over to vote for Joe Biden. It is possible. It definitely can happen. There's a very notable thing for losing candidates to stop the entire delegate roll call at their state and donate all of their future delegates after that state to the winning candidate, which is why you may have seen Hillary Clinton's number be higher than what she actually won on top of super delegates. But it was Vermont, so it didn't have too much of an impact, but still, it was different than what we calculated the actual number to be. So let's say even in that scenario, I know I'm dragging this video on a little bit more, but let's say somehow let's say Biden gets those 14 in Iowa, and then you go over to New Hampshire, and Biden got 0 here, Buttigieg got 9. Let's say he takes all of those. You go over to a number of other states that I guess Bloomberg did well in. You just add those up for Joe Biden. It's honestly just, it would not be good for Bernie Sanders, to be completely honest. And it just even makes it more of an obstacle for him to overcome if he was otherwise not in the race. So, I mean, if he was otherwise not endorsing anyone and just waiting for the convention to hit, but it is likely that these candidates do throw their delegates towards Joe Biden once we actually hit the nominating process. But that pretty much wraps up this video. This is a, I guess, realistic look at how Bernie Sanders can reach a contested convention and then possibly victory. It's a lot of jumps, and it's going to be extremely hard if he does actually end up remaining in the race, but we've narrowed it down to 2 candidates. Tulsi Gabbard is no longer running. Should be interesting if we actually do see Bernie Sanders stay in the race. Again, I hope that he does, because I don't want to just cover a one-sided Democratic primary. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Comment down suggestions below, and I will see you all tomorrow.